Hi BookTube! I'm here to do the education tag. I was tagged by Crystal over at Biblioatlas. She's the creator of the tag, so I'll link her channel in the description box down below. Now, for the sake of not uploading an hour-long video, because the first time I filmed this it was an hour long, I'm going to be very brief, but I am more than willing to talk about this in the comments. I should also mention that Crystal and I are both from Ontario, so what we decided to do is she'd talk about issues in the Northern Ontario community, and I talk about kind of like Southern Ontario, but more specifically the current sex ed kerfuffle that is going on. So that's my bent on this tag. So one, what country did you get your education in? Canada, specifically Ontario, because in Canada the education is controlled at the provincial level. So education in Ontario is different from the education in Alberta or Newfoundland or Quebec, say. So, two, what's your educational background? I went to Catholic school for elementary and secondary for multiple reasons. There's two school systems in Ontario. There's the normal public school, and then there's the Catholic public school, which is not a private school. It's free to attend if you're Catholic. So I went to those for both elementary and secondary because there's higher standards for students, there's better funding, and stronger discipline. I then went on to post-secondary. I have a specialized honors Bachelor of Arts in English with a minor in history from York University, and I got a Bachelor of Education from OISE through the University of Toronto. I couldn't find a suitable teaching job, so I also went to college because the company was offering to pay for everything and pay me an hourly wage and guarantee me a job. So I got a certificate as a personal support worker, which is what we call them in Ontario. They're called different things wherever. They're basically a practical nurse. Question 3. How is your public education structured? Is there a private school option? So Ontario, as previously mentioned, we have the non-religious public schools, Catholic schools, and private schools. The only difference in curriculum between the public and the Catholic schools is that Catholic schools have a religious education requirement, and in high school that religion curriculum is not all about Catholicism, although it is for the previous 10-12 years of education from kindergarten to grade 10. So the 11th grade is world religion, and 12th grade is philosophy and social justice. And there are private schools, but there's a lot of issues around those, such as the education of the teachers, which means you don't have to have a bachelor in anything in order to teach in private schools, and they aren't doing nearly as well as public schools are. Question 4. Is it more common to study in your own country, or do parents send their children to other countries? Why? No, it is most common for people to actually come to Canada to study. The only cases I've heard of where Canadian students go to the States is if they're on a sports scholarships, because sports at the post-secondary level are much more emphasized in the States than they are in Canada. Number 5. What does your country consider to be a priority for education? I can only really speak for the curriculums that I know, which is English and history, high school ones, where the curriculum places less stress on memory and specific books or events. So for example, you can teach pretty much any book that you can get approved by your department head, and you can request books as well. And there's more emphasis on analysis, communication, application of knowledge. If you know a student in Ontario, ask to take a look at the rubrics, and it breaks it down really quite nicely, what we prioritize there. I think the standardized tests in Ontario kind of show where our priorities are in general. They are tests in grade 3, 6, 9, and 10, which test only on math and literacy. So I guess that's where we place our emphasis in education on. Not necessarily science or physical education or social sciences, but on math and literacy, which I guess are basic, important education priorities. So this is where I'm not going to be so brief. This is where I really want to rant. Question 6. Are there any controversies or current issues with education right now? Oh boy, is there. So let me give you a bit of history. Ontario is historically a more liberal-leaning province. We tend to elect liberal leaders as opposed to conservative leaders. But the Liberal Party screwed up, and we are now under a conservative leadership, recently elected, and this has affected education, specifically in that we have reverted from the well-researched, not even just well-intentioned, but really, really good curriculum was established in 2015 that was backed by research, in both education and science and in sexual education and sexual issues in general. So Ford, who has admitted himself that he barely graduated high school, has no post-secondary whatsoever to talk about. He's only in politics because his brother was into politics, is now our premier in charge of education, and has listened to the loud, they're not a majority, they listen to the loud religious conservatives who erroneously believe that the 2015 curriculum was teaching kindergartners how to have sex. And there was an outcry and that we should revert back to the 1998 curriculum, which is severely lacking and 20 years out of date. A lot has changed in those 20 years, and it's not reflected in the 1998 curriculum. It was reflected in the 2015 curriculum. So let me talk more specifically about that. The 1998 curriculum erases certain things in the 2015 curriculum, such as the correct words for genitalia, any mention of gender non-conforming and transgender, the complete erasure of First Nations cultural teachings about sexual education. There's no mention of the word consent in the 1998 curriculum, and we aren't even going to talk about the issues of technology in sex, because smartphones and technology has changed so much since 1998. I remember school in 1998, we had one computer that was connected to the internet, and if you were lucky, you had internet at home. Nowadays, people carry the internet around in their pockets. Kids have ready access to the internet. So it doesn't talk about things like trafficking. It doesn't talk about things like being charged with child pornography if you're underage and taking naked photos of yourself. It doesn't talk about sexting. It doesn't talk about consent in regards to that. This has resulted in people getting unsolicited dick pics. If you had this education and learned that that's not what people want, that is a form of sexual harassment, if you're taught that in school, chances are there'd be less of this stuff going on. But the conservatives, who for some reason call themselves the progressive conservatives, and should really be called the regressive conservatives, are reverting back to this curriculum that is just going to end up resulting in having more children harmed, instead of educating kids correctly. There's a lot of protests about this. There have been student walkouts. There have been teachers who have come out and said, no, I'm still going to teach the 2015 curriculum regardless. There have been school boards that have stated that they are going to continue teaching the 2015 curriculum. Most recently, the Toronto Catholic District School Board has said they're going to stay with the bishop-approved 2015 curriculum, instead of reverting back to the 1998 curriculum. And Ford is our premier. I don't know if I mentioned his name. It gag when I mentioned his name. Anyways, he has established a tattletale phone line for students and parents to report teachers who are refusing to teach the 1998 curriculum. So there have been suggestions that instead people call and fill up the inbox with reasons as to why the 1998 curriculum and this whole decision is horrendous. I also want to talk about, as a teacher, ways to incorporate conversations around issues of gender and sexuality that won't be taught in the sex ed curriculum anymore in other subjects. So generally sexual education would fall under physical or religious education, depending on which school system you're in. But you can talk about it in other subjects. For example, in science, you can talk about the differences between sex and gender. Or in history, you can talk about how the birth control pill allowed for a woman's rights, and the issues of consent and taking control of your sexual reproductive rights affected that. Affected history. You can use the works of queer people in English and talk about how their identities affected their works. So I'm not agreeing at all with what Ford's doing. I hope I've established that well. But I'm pointing out that until this whole situation changes, because I have hope that it will, even if it takes 4 years for the Liberals to get back into power, that we don't have to revert back to allowing children to come to harm, because we're not educating them properly. Yes. Okay, back to being brief and concise. 7, university, yay or nay? What's the climate for this in your country? I think it's yay for now, but I can see that in the future there might be a decline in this because of the cost of school, and because of the viability of the job market. Having a degree no longer guarantees you a job. There's a lot of people with, bachelors working in the service or retail industries. So university education is no longer financially viable, and I think that we're going to see a decline in the amount of post-secondary educated adults in Canada. Number 8, what books or types of books did you have to read in school? Are you any you liked? Did school make you a reader? I loved reading in school. The analysis, the symbolism, the whole writing essays just made me fall more in love with reading. And because of this, reading for me is not just a pursuit of pleasure, a pursuit of escape. It is also an intellectual pursuit to challenge myself. Some of my all-time favorite books are books I was introduced to in high school. Lord of the Flies, Frankenstein, Wuthering Heights, 1984, Fifth Business, Brave New World, The Little Prince, just to mention a few. Then in university, I concentrated on Victorian literature, although eventually I took enough courses to get a specialized honor and decided to branch out. I took a course on James Joyce, one on African drama, gay literature. I took a lot of different courses at that time. Number 9, is there anything bookish about your school or education you'd like to talk about? To be honest, when I was in elementary school, I didn't really think about reading and writing in English because it came so naturally to me. They were such a part of my life that I didn't really realize that people didn't like reading or didn't read. And I eventually pursued English to the exclusion of all else in high school and university, with the exception of history, of course. And it kind of evolved into this joint love of history and English. Number 10, how do you think your education system compares with others around the world? I'm very optimistic about the education system in Ontario, aside from this whole sex ed kerfuffle and problem with math that we're having right now. But I think that's just because of the way math is taught, and that it will be changed with younger, more passionate teachers coming in. So I think, I'm pretty optimistic after the Conservatives get out of power. I do think that our proximity in history shows that our education model is more based on education in the States and in England, and that we need to look to places like Norway and Sweden and Germany for evolving and improving our education systems. Okay, 11. Are there any educational quirks that exist in your country? Is there anything else you'd like to add? An interesting thing about education in Ontario here is that our secondary school system is separated into streams, depending on what you're going to do after high school. First, I have to explain that university and college are two different things in Ontario. I know sometimes they're interchangeably used in the States, but university is for academic pursuits and college is for more practical pursuits. So when you're in high school, you kind of have to decide university, college, or workforce. So you have the academic stream, which places more emphasis on analysis and more emphasis on analysis and academic studies. Then you have the applied stream, which is for kids who are going to college for more practical pursuits like practical nursing or social worker or early childhood education, those types of things. And then there's the other stream, which is not used as much. We try to get as much kids into applied as we can, but there's kids with severe learning disabilities that have the third stream, which means they're basically just going to go into the workforce after school. So there's less emphasis on academics, more on like practical and life skills, and giving students extra time to complete homework and such. Yeah, that's it. I have a lot more I want to say about education, but in the interest of keeping this video short, that's where I'm going to leave it. There's a few people I want to tag, and I'll put them in the description box down below because I didn't write notes down for that. So that's it. Thank you for watching.